Hey everyone, if you happen to be in the market like I was to find a wireless video transmission system, I think I may have something here for you. So, hey everyone, my name is Doug. I run a company in Orem, Utah called Doug Johnson Productions. And I've been searching for a while for a wireless video system that I could use, put on a camera to have it wander around, say on the field of a sporting event or whatever. So I've been looking for a while. I'd invested in a couple of them and those didn't work out. So I've been anxious to find something that actually worked, and I think I've got one here for you. This is the Ghost-Eye 200M from a company called Cinegears. And in interest of full disclosure, this system was provided to me by Cinegears, although they have no editorial control over the content of this video, and they will not see this video prior to being published. So this is a wireless system that's rated to up to 200 meters. Lets you use SDI or HDMI on both ends. So you can your camera can be either SDI or HDMI, and then on the receiving end you can actually hook up either and or both. So you can hook it to a monitor or hook it into a video production system, and it supports video up to 1080p at up to 60 frames per second. One of the problems with some of the wireless systems out there is some compatibility issues with some cameras. I use Sony cameras and Blackmagic cameras, and some of the systems I've used in the past did not work with those cameras at 1080p at 60 frames per second because they did not support what's called level B for a 3 gig SDI. I was able to make that work with these, although a couple times when I tried it I had to power cycle the transmitter and or receiver in order to get them to link up and then be able to transmit that either 60 frames per second or 30 frames per second. At 24 frames per second or at 720p, they absolutely worked flawlessly, worked every single time. So there was a little bit of minor inconvenience there trying to make them work at either 30 or 60 frames per second. I don't consider that a big deal because, power cycling the switch a couple times, not really a problem. At least they're capable of doing it, unlike the other systems that I've tested, in which case I have not found any other systems that actually supported those particular signal formats. So I was pleased that those actually did work just fine with this system. So before I go on, let me actually grab the case here and I'll show you what's included as part of the kit. So in addition to the transmitter and receiver, they include a wireless case. Let me move these out of the way just for the moment. So inside this case, which I believe is waterproof, space for transmitter and receiver. There are also some spare antennas in there. They include several cables, so there's a pair of SDI cables, one for transmitter, one for receiver. Those are about 2.5 feet long. There's also a pair of power cables that allow you to connect to a DTAP. So if you have either a battery or a camera that has a DTAP output, you can connect that and then use the LEMO connector on the side of the transmitter and or receiver. There is a AC power adapter that can be used to power either the transmitter or receiver. Again, it has that LEMO connector on it, and they do include the plug for both the US and European power outlets. There's a little V-mount clip in there, and then a pair of cold shoe mounts that you can use to attach the quarter 20 threads on the unit. And then there's also a user or owner's manual included as part of that as well. Now, we'll do kind of a quick rundown of each of the transmitter and receiver. So on the side here we have the LEMO connector for power, an SDI video input, an HDMI video input, a USB port for possible firmware upgrades, a channel display, and a couple of buttons there in order to select the channel. You can choose any of 10 channels on these units. Transmitter receiver obviously have to match, and you're able to run about 4 systems simultaneously. Technically you might be able to get away with more, but they start interfering with one another if you have more than 4 running at a time. There on the back there is a Sony NPF style battery mount. So Sony style batteries that a lot of us have laying around will just work just fine on these, and battery life is actually really good. And then on the opposite side there is a power switch and a little fan, and then 2 antennas on top. Now they make very clear in the manual and a little sticker on the back that you have to hook the antennas in before you turn it on. So if you do invest in one of these systems, always make sure you do that, otherwise you risk burning out the electronics. That can be a very bad thing. There are also, in terms of mounting options, 1/4-20 thread on this side as well as on the bottom. So you can either mount the system vertically or you mount it horizontally and flip the antennas up, which is kind of the way I use it. So I'll mount this on the front of the camera and then run cables to the camera from there. The receiver is kind of a similar layout. Oh, it is physically larger and has more antennas. The reason it has so many antennas, that just gives it a better chance of picking up the signal and being able to work around interference and signal dropouts and whatnot. So on the side here, again, a LEMO connector for power, and these LEMO connectors support anywhere from 7 to 36 volts, so it doesn't have to be the standard 12 volts that you would normally see out of a DTAP or whatever. There's an HDMI output, an SDI output, again another USB port for possible firmware upgrades, a channel display, and a couple of buttons there in order to select the channel. On the opposite side, have a power switch, and then there's a fan there in order to help keep the unit cool. I've never heard the fan on the receiver turn on. However, I have heard the fan on the transmitter turn on, and it's got a little bit of a high-pitched whine to it. In the sort of environments I'm working in, that's not a problem, but I could see that maybe being an issue if it's used on a film set and the transmitter is close to the microphone that's capturing on-location audio. So if having absolutely silent transmitter is important to you, this may not be the right unit for you. But for environments I work in, they tend to be very loud, and so having a fan on there that makes a little bit of noise is not really a huge problem. So in terms of range, these are rated for 200 meters. That's where the 200M comes from in the model name. And I've always been skeptical of wireless system ranges in the past because manufacturers tend to overstate what they're capable of. This is one time when that seems to not be the case. As I was doing some range testing on these, I was able to achieve 200 meters pretty easily and pretty reliably, as long as there was line of sight between transmitter and receiver. And that's going to be a limitation you have. The line of sight is going to be a limitation you're going to have no matter what system you buy. These operate in a high frequency, so 5.8 gigahertz, like most of the systems that are out there. And signals that are that high have almost zero tolerance for any sort of obstruction in the way. So even like leaves on a tree will block the signal. So it's really important that you have the transmitter and receiver mounted and oriented in such a way that they can see one another in order to achieve the most degree of reliability between the two. So even though these were actually rated for 200 meters, I was able to, under kind of more strict circumstances, get them to work out past 400 meters. And so at 400 meters, I was still able to achieve the signal lock with a clean signal between the two, but the transmitter had to be oriented just the right direction towards the receiver in order to get that. And the minute it was turned, say 90 degrees, the signal would drop out. You can mess with antenna orientation a little bit to try and improve that, but bottom line is I wouldn't necessarily plan on being able to push signals a whole lot past 200 meters with this particular model, just because the possibility of the signal dropping out becomes fairly high at that point. Now, when I was doing the testing, as I was getting towards the end of the usable range, there would start to be some pixelation in the image. I'll show you an example of that here now. But even though that may seem like a negative, I actually consider that to be a feature, because some of the other wireless systems I've used, when you get close to the edge of the range, the signal is absolutely perfect until it drops out completely, and you get no warning whatsoever that you're approaching the edge of the range. The signal just dies on you, and you absolutely get nothing. So the fact that you're able to see some visible artifacts on this when you get close to the edge of the available range, I think is actually a nice feature of those. So you can get on your comms and tell your camera operator, hey, move a little bit to one side, or come a little bit closer to the receiver, or reorient the receiver before the signal actually drops out entirely, so you get some warning. But as long as the transmitter and receiver are well within the estimated range, the picture quality is absolutely flawless. No image artifacts whatsoever. The other nice thing about these in terms of features is there is effectively zero latency on them. There's some inherent latency just from converting from one format, wired to wireless and back again, but the latency is so low that it's much less than one frame of video. So in terms of all practical purposes, you'd be able to have a wireless camera intermix with wired cameras with no problem whatsoever, mismatching the amount of latency between the cameras. So you use wireless camera at the same time you're using wired cameras, and you wouldn't see any sort of additional delay switching between those cameras. So nice feature there. The other thing that was really impressive to me was the battery life. So when I did my initial testing, I was using a battery that was about a third this size, and it was actually a really old one. It was the only one I had handy at the time. It's a battery I've had for probably close to 20 years. It's a Sony NPF, I believe, 330. And I popped that on the transmitter, and it ran for over 2 hours, just that little tiny, really old battery. And when I've used these bigger batteries, I haven't even exhausted one yet. In one case, I had a single battery on the receiver, ran it all day long, no issues whatsoever. So battery life is absolutely great on these systems. So in terms of performance, I think these things actually work really, really well. So aside from a little bit of wonkiness and dealing with a couple of different signal formats where I had to cycle the power once or twice on each of the units, they've actually worked really, really well, better than what I had expected, to be quite honest. So I've been very pleased with that. Now there are a couple of niggling issues, one of which I already mentioned. That's the fan noise on the transmitter. But I also would have liked to have had the video connections on the opposite side of the transmitter. So when I go to mount it on a camera, I'll bring a camera up here in a minute. When I go mount it on a camera and orient the antennas and put the antennas on the front, that puts the video connections on the left side, which is where your face is on all the cameras that I use anyway. So that's kind of the cable can be a little bit in the way there. And even if you mount the transmitter on the back in sort of a vertical orientation, those connections are still on the left side, which is inconvenient. That would have been nice if they were on the opposite side. So just a little, but that's just a little nitpicky thing. It doesn't prevent the system from working well, obviously. The other issue, and it's going to be a problem for some, not a huge problem for me in the way we use it, but it would have been nice to have an SDI pass-through, video pass-through on the transmitter so that you can hook up a local monitor. It's going to be more important in the filmmaking world, where you might have a focus puller right there at the camera, or maybe your camera operator wants to use a larger display than what's available on the camera. So it'd be nice to have a pass-through on cameras that don't already have multiple SDI outputs of their own. But again, not a problem for the way my company works. But it would have been a nice feature. The receiver does have the dual outputs there, so not as much of an issue. I mean, second SDI sure may have been nice, but I don't think it's essential because it does have the HDMI. And a lot of portable monitors do have HDMI, so you can always use that. All right, so. But that's kind of it in terms of the little niggling issues that I had with these. There's no showstoppers here. These systems actually worked flawlessly. Like I say, I've been using these for about a month now. I've used them on, I believe, 4 events, and they've worked absolutely flawlessly for me. They've worked great. I've been very, very happy with these, and so I have no problem recommending these systems whatsoever. I was going to hook up a camera and show you guys, but there's really not a whole lot of purpose in doing that because the video coming out of them is identical to the video going in, so it looked just like a wired connection. So anyway, but so that's it. Again, this is the Ghost-Eye 200M series of wireless system from Cinegears, and they have other higher end models. They have a 400M, 600M, and several others that offer more features or better range. So it does are a little more expensive. The price of this system currently is $1,899, and I think that's a very fair price for the level of performance you're getting out of this. These do tend to perform better than some of the systems out there that cost more money from other manufacturers. So again, I've been very happy with it, and I have no problem whatsoever recommending this for you.